Thomas was returning home late at night. The last train, as always, was almost empty. He sat in the middle of the carriage, throwing his briefcase on the seat next to him. The carriage was dimly lit, the lamps flickering, creating ominous shadows on the walls. There was absolute silence all around, broken only by the dull clatter of the wheels on the rails. Thomas looked around and noticed that, besides him, there was another passenger in the carriage. The man was sitting at the very end of the carriage, with his back to him, staring motionless out the window. Thomas felt a slight discomfort, but quickly looked away. Just another passenger, he thought. However, the strange feeling did not leave him. The man at the end of the carriage was sitting somehow too still, not moving even when the train rocked. A few minutes later, Thomas again stole a glance in his direction. This time, the figure seemed to turn slightly, but his face was still not visible. It seemed to him that the man was watching him out of the corner of his eye. The light in the carriage flickered, and Thomas felt a chill run down his spine. When the light came back on, the passenger sitting at the end was already closer, having moved forward a few seats. The train slowed, and there was the familiar hiss of doors opening. Thomas looked out the window, expecting to see the bright lights of the platform, but instead he was met with darkness. There were no stations or streets beyond the windows, only endless, thick darkness. The carriage doors opened, but no one entered or exited. Thomas turned his head toward the end of the carriage, where the man was still sitting. He did not move, even as the doors began to close. Thomas felt the tension in the air grow. He looked at his watch. 2:47. The hands did not move. A minute passed, then 2, but time remained frozen. "What the hell?" Thomas whispered, trying to cope with the rising panic. The lights flickered again, and as the carriage was momentarily plunged into darkness, Thomas heard a sound, a soft, barely perceptible rustling. When the light came back, the passenger at the end of the carriage was even closer, now sitting just a few rows away. Thomas froze. The man sat in the same position, his back to him, but now his head was slightly tilted to the side as if he were listening. The train continued to move, but the windows showed the same thing, endless, all-consuming darkness. Thomas realized that the train should have arrived at his station long ago, but everything continued. The hands of the clock still did not move, as if time had frozen with it. The light flickered again, and the sound of footsteps echoed through the carriage. Quiet, measured, they were approaching. Thomas clung to the seat, not taking his eyes off the figure. But when he looked back, there was no one there. The air in the carriage became heavy. A chill ran through his body, and it seemed to him that someone was breathing right behind him. Thomas turned around, hoping it was just his imagination. But what he saw made his heart stop. In the seat next to him, dimly lit by the flickering light, sat the man he had seen earlier at the end of the carriage. Now he was so close that Thomas could make out details. It was himself. The figure looked older, his face pale, his eyes dull, his lips twisted into a lifeless, empty smile. He didn't move, but his gaze, heavy and dark, was directed straight at Thomas. "What the—" he breathed, moving back, but his back was already pressed against the cold glass. The figure rose slowly, its movements unnatural, as if it existed in slow motion. Thomas tried to get up, to run to the other carriage, but his feet seemed to have grown to the floor. The light flickered again, and the next second the figure was right in front of him. "You are me," a silent voice whispered in his head. Thomas felt the world around him grow viscous, as if time and space no longer obeyed the laws of reality. Suddenly, the train shook, and he saw his reflection in the window. But it was not him. His face looked gaunt, just like the figure, and his eyes had lost all life. He realized the truth. This train would never stop. It was stuck in an endless loop in which every passenger became part of it. The man at the end of the carriage was his future, and soon he himself would take that place. The light in the carriage went out completely, leaving Thomas alone with the darkness. When the train opened its doors again at an empty station, the carriage was empty, except for one man at the very end, motionless, silent, with an extinguished look. The new passenger, who sat in the middle of the carriage, looked around, but did not pay attention to it. The train moved forward, and endless darkness appeared outside the windows again.